No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
I'm interested in one thing, Neil, the future. And believe me, I know the only way to get there is together.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
You may think you know what you're dealing with, but believe me, you don't.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
For centuries, philosophers have used the dialogue to search for truth, because it's through conversation, through the logos, that we find it. This is the Dialogue, where ancient philosophy, history, and theology meet modern life. Together, we'll wrestle with big questions and give our answers through the way we live. Let's start the conversation.
All right, man. So this is not our usual, hey, we're in the middle of a conversation, because we actually finished up, I don't know if this is part of the evolution of the dialogue, but we finished up with just kind of realizing that we need to dive in on spiritual authority, which I'm very excited to get into, because I have thought about this since the last time, and I don't know if I'd say eagerly anticipating, but to use scriptural language, but I've been looking forward to this one, man.
Well, we were in the middle of a conversation, then we had to stop it because we were getting into some deep waters,
We'd taken 5 turns and we were about to take another one, and so it was like, let's just pause here, refuel the car, and then we'll go again. So we refueled and we're ready to go.
So we've been talking about feedback.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Been fun. No, I was gonna ask you, man. So I just want to dive in, because here's my thing, and I don't want to. This is not a diversion. This is to me, an understanding of spiritual authority setup, because I've been thinking about this. So I'm in leadership at the church, as are you. At our church, we go to the same church, and so when you're in leadership at the church, people will tell you things about when they're not happy, and oftentimes what people are not happy about is something that was said from the stage by a pastor, which in this case would be your dad, right? And so I was looking, I've dealt with this, and anytime someone brings me something, what they want is they want to argue the points. And what I say is I go, hey, let's assume everything you say is right. What do you think you should do about it? I literally never get into a point by point bloating, even if the person's wholly wrong, because to me, it's more of, because what we're talking about today is really the point. But I was thinking about this, with there's some big name pastors in Dallas, and they're exciting. They have massive social media followings. They have great podcasts. They have big YouTubes. And I mean, I wonder oftentimes if people are starting to more follow a pastor than they are to actually, be placed in a church body and understand what that means. Would you agree with that, or do you think I'm off base?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've made some pretty big mistakes in leading the church for the past 50 years. I mean, and I think one of those is, it's really interesting, man. It's like we start on this subject and then we get into this other thing. We're gonna do the spiritual authority thing.
Well, I think this is part of it, though. That's why I brought it.
So Billy Graham, at close to the end of his life, Billy Graham, he would do these massive stadium crusades, reach millions. I mean, there's no one that probably reached more people for Christ around the world than Billy Graham, like in modern history, right? Mm-hmm. So what he would do, what his emphasis was, he would come into a city, he would do a crusade, and he knew that just getting someone saved or helping someone to experience Jesus was just step one, and there's a whole lot of steps for them to take, right? So he would partner with churches. Like, his goal is to partner with churches, plug them in to a church who's going to disciple them and fulfill the Great Commission, which Matthew 28 says, Jesus says, teach people to obey all I've commanded you, right? So there's this massive discipleship element that Christianity is supposedly all about, right? And I say supposedly because of what's happened really in the modern church. So what happened, and I heard Billy Graham talk about this. What happened was churches saw how many people came to a Billy Graham crusade. And so instead of focusing their church around discipleship and developing mature Christ followers, they turned their churches into Billy Graham crusades. So you should have, like, for me, and there's a whole bunch of different philosophies out here, right? But you should have aspects to your church that are like new person friendly, or that are salvation oriented, which is like the first step is like learning and understanding the gospel. And that's so powerful and all of that. but that's not really, to me, necessarily the function of the church. Like the key function of the church is to disciple people and develop them and raise them up. Well, the problem with that, right, is that it's just not sexy. Like, you're not going to get a whole lot of people up front. Your auditorium you might not have 10,000 people in your church, on and on, right? And that's not like an indictment of one particular person. That's like what the movement of the Western church has been for like at least the past 50 years. Is we're going to grow, we're going to focus on growth, and there is this dynamic that comes with focusing on growth that you just try to make everything easy for everybody, right? Well, the problem with that is that following Jesus isn't easy. It's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Jesus said, you have to lay down your life and pick up your cross. He said, you can't follow me without giving up everything that you own. So if you're discipling someone effectively, if you're teaching someone how to follow Jesus, at some point, you're going to have a lot of hard conversations about everything, about how they're doing money, about their emotional state, about their approach to whatever the various temptations are that they fight in their life, on and on and on. Right? So what happened was they created this movement, or this movement was created. It's called the seeker-sensitive movement, right? Which is now kind of an insult. For a long time, it wasn't an insult, but it's this idea of like people are really open to the gospel if we just kind of make it easy for them. And I'm all for making things kind of easy to interact with and not super complicated, but simple and easy aren't the same thing. So you can make something simple. Like discipline is a simple concept. It's not easy though, right? It's like you don't have to spend 3 hours explaining to someone what discipline is. It's like, well, discipline is just consistently making the right choice even when you don't feel like doing it. There's a whole lot of other ways to say that, right? But that's simple to explain. It's really hard to do. So what's happened, to me, and this even relates to our discussion on authority, is we've leaned into as the church, as like the church of Jesus. We've leaned into a lot of Western delusion, right? And so it's interesting that you would start there, because that was like the thing in my mind was, we live in one of the greatest times in human history. And one of the things that makes that a great time in human history is that we get to pick our leaders.
Yeah, for real.
Right. So like I can vote for the mayor of my city. I can vote for the president of my HOA. Like there's so much in the West is like, I get to decide who the leader of this is. Now, it's easy to think that that's just how life works. That's really not how life works. That's how the Western world works. That's really been developed really over the past 250 years. I mean, this idea of like representative government, and it's called republicanism, not Republican in terms of being a conservative or a liberal. It's just called republicanism. So this idea of like a republic, a representative republic, is new, But for most of human history, people didn't pick their leaders. So, you think about it in the context of the church, like in the context of what you're saying, you didn't have the ability to get in a car and drive to like the next city over that was 10 miles away.
Yeah, we commute to Ephesus from Corinth because,
if you don't like the church in the city that you're in, that's tough.
Yeah. Like
this is the church. So if you're going to go to church here, I mean, you could start your own church in the same city, but if you're going to go to church here, the options are pretty limited, right? So we've developed, on one hand, it's good. Like the power of choice is amazing. On the other hand, people think that choice is like the supreme virtue, right? And so like, if I'm somewhere, if I'm at a job, if I'm in a relationship, if I'm at a church and I don't like what's happening for any given period of time, I could just leave and go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. That's to me the danger of the danger of all the good things that have happened in the history of the Western world. I mean, because you think about, so like to talk about authority, for most of human history, it hasn't been true that you get to pick your leader.
Right.
Right. So you don't get to pick your parents. I didn't get to pick the parents that I had. Nobody does. Right. You have to be in whatever family that you're pretty much assigned to by God. And there's positives and negatives, and there's good families and there's bad families and all that. What's not going to change is your ability to choose that. right? So all these verses all throughout the scripture, there's a lot of different um, perspectives all throughout scripture of spiritual authority, of submitting to authority. Those perspectives, it's important to understand the context of a perspective like that, because those perspectives come from a time in history where nobody voted for anything.
Mhm.
Like in the Roman Empire, which is where Christianity was, which is where, you know, Israel was, and all that was a part of the Roman Empire. You had an emperor, and that emperor pretty much decided everything for everybody that lived in the whole country and the whole nation. Uh, and their decisions were ironclad and binding. And if you didn't respect their decisions, you ran the risk of death. If that emperor would put a governor over you or some kind of governmental structure over you, that governor's job was not to represent. So, like, we live in a country now. I'm just more like explaining our perspective versus like the
Yeah.
historical
You
perspective.
give an historical. Yeah.
We live in a society now where the responsibility of the government is to represent me, right? And represent my issues. For most of human history, it's been the opposite. The responsibility of government has been to represent the issues of whoever the highest authority is in the land.
Right.
So, the role that the governor would have played, well, you see this in the story of Jesus. Pontius Pilate, he's the governor of that part of the Roman Empire. His role was to represent Caesar there, not to plead for the people to Caesar, right? There was dynamics related to that, but I want to give you this kind of perspective on Christianity. So for over 300 years of Christianity's existence, from its very beginnings, they were massively persecuted. So there's this emperor in the 200s AD. His name was Decius. He issued an edict throughout the Roman Empire that they had to sacrifice to the gods, to the Roman gods, in the presence of a government official. So everybody who was a part of the Roman Empire had to sacrifice to the Roman gods in the presence of some government official. And if they didn't, their whole family would be killed.
How's that?
And that's not just for Christians. That was just like, you're going to do this or we're going to murder all of you, right? And also, just as also something that's worth mentioning, they didn't have police in the ancient Roman world, right?
Right.
So it's pretty much we have more freedoms, we have more protection. Like, people talk now about how, oh man, you know, like the kind of people that are going to say, hey, it's worse than it's ever been, like in society and in the world today, are completely delusional.
Oh, they have no context whatsoever. Yeah.
Oh, no matter what's happening, we live in a safer time in world history. We live in a time where we have laws that protect us. I mean, that for most of human history, this wasn't true. So just talking about the beginnings of Christianity. So they were treated like a Jewish cult. The Jews tried to kill them. Well, anyway, the Romans end up kind of joining that, because in Rome and in the Roman Empire, it wasn't just about worshiping the Roman gods. It was about worshiping the emperor, because the emperor was seen as a deity, right? So this guy named Decius comes. He starts to kind of force this. Well, then there's this guy named Valerian, Emperor Valerian. So he comes after Decius, and he orders all church leaders, pastors, whatever role you played in the church, he orders all of them sentenced to death, and he strips Christians, anyone who identifies as a Christian, he strips them of all their land, possessions, and titles. So anything that they owned, that's not yours anymore. Right?
Yeah.
Then that wasn't even like the worst part. So then you have a Diocletian. So Diocletian in the 300s. So this is like, starts around 250 AD. This goes for over 100 years. Okay. So a whole generation of people that are Christians experience this, right?
And yet it still grows. Yet Christianity grows. I think that's amazing. Like, when you think about, there's no good reason. Like, if you're ever a person, I wanted to pause you real quick so you can take a sip of that energy drink, and also just to point out, like, I've been like researching just for my conviction in the truth of what we know to be true has just deepened, because the more I look at what's actually happened in history, like not even like biblical or church history, but just human history as a whole, and then looking at how the Bible lines up to it, and then you hear something like that, like, hey, we're going to start, like, I'm a marketer. If I was selling something that the reward for being a part of it was eternal life, which you're going to get eventually when you die. But in the meantime, you're going to lose all your possessions, everything that you've worked for, and you're basically going to be like absolutely have the whole of the government against you. That's a hard sell. I don't even know how I would market that.
Yeah,
If
you
there's
know
no
what,
truth,
your
yeah,
whole family's gonna die because you've seen other people experience the same thing.
I mean, yeah, and yet it grows. Man, I love that. It's amazing.
So
Sorry, I just wanted to interject because I just think that's such a fantastic thing to
no, and
realize.
dude, the foundational documents of the New Testament was written. I mean, it was written before this, but the New Testament was written in this kind of context.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
amazing.
so when the Bible and the New Testament also was written in the context of slavery.
Right.
So the book of Colossians, Paul says, you don't work for your earthly masters, you work for God. So do everything you do as unto the Lord. That's not about, hey, go do your job today and don't worry about how much you're getting paid. It's like if you're a slave, be a really good slave. Now,
Right.
that kind of sucks, like honestly. Like why,
Yeah.
so the authority dynamic, to me in the Bible is something we don't understand
I
of
agree. Yeah, I agree.
of how much, because you have to have such an understanding of the context of this to understand how the Bible talks about authority. So, so then to go on, like Diocletian, right? He was the worst. He was the worst of. He was the worst before Constantine came and made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire. So he ordered all churches that they could find. He ordered them all burned to the ground. Any scripture that his soldiers found, he commanded it to be burned. They kept confiscating church and church possessions. So it wasn't like they had buildings. It was like they would, if you had like a house church and you're a Christian, they would take your house away from you, kick you out of your house.
That's wild.
Christians were prohibited from assembling in any size group, right? If you owned scripture, you would be executed or tortured. And the preferred, there's this like apocryphal story. I don't know how true it is, but the idea, there was the term called a Roman candle, right? And Roman
Yeah.
candle was when at night, these are stories that are told about this and in like all these different histories. They would tie Christians to a stake in throughout the cities and burn them at the stake, right? And they would burn through the night, and that would be it was called a Roman candle, allegedly, right? So
Yeah.
then the
Now, real
question
quick,
is,
real quick. Sorry, Josh. 'Cause I'm just
yeah,
this is stuff I've been researching and stuff. So I want you to, for everybody, once again, I this wasn't part of the plan, but I feel like I don't even know why we say that anymore because we should just know that that the plan is to not be part of the
we're
plan.
just in a flow at all times.
We are, man. But I love this flow so much because when you look at and like please get on ChatGPT or whatever your AI source is and ask about the historical documentation for Christ. When you start realizing, so listen to what Josh just said. A couple hundred years after Jesus has been here, Diocletian's like, hey, if you find anything, burn it. Anything about this Christian, which Christian was Christ, right? He's not. This is not Hebrew. At this point, they've already sacked Rome. They've ended the nation of Israel, and they've expelled all the Jews from Jerusalem. That's already happened, right? So
Yep.
so that's already been taken care of. And now this Christian sect is going. When you start realizing that Jesus is the most well documented historical figure, where there's literally like over 10,000 manuscripts with documentation for Christ, with the New Testament writings that were copied and repeated and stored. And like think about the price that these people paid for how important this was. And by the way, it wasn't cheap to get these manuscripts made. It's not like they could go down to Kinko's and like run off a few copies. How's that for old school Kinko's? I don't even know where that came from, dude. I'm pretty sure they're out of business. But like
Yeah,
it's not like you could
FedEx office now, right?
Right. Sorry, I forgot FedEx bottom out. But the point is, it's not like you could just, you had to like, first of all, if you want to get papyrus paper, it was not cheap, right? That would last a lot longer. But that it was not cheap, and then you would have to find a scribe to actually just inscribe it for you. We're talking like months, and in like I looked it up. A book like Romans that's long, it would be a year's wages to pay for all the materials and the time to actually have it made. So
Yeah.
so think about the trouble. It's like, hey, we're gonna get killed for this, and it's really expensive. It's massively inconvenient, but it's so important we have to do it. This is what we have, and we have the privilege of getting to read in 46 translations on our phone now because these people paid that price.
Well,
It's huge.
and untold numbers of people throughout history, right, were martyred for this.
Yeah.
And if these are a set of false beliefs, it sure costs people a lot. right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Um, so here's the challenging thing though about all this. It's like, oh wow, that's so amazing, that's so crazy, all the persecution of Christianity and all that.
Yeah.
How did Christians respond? And this is where the ancient Christian response, I feel like personally deviates from the modern Christian response.
Right.
Like the ancient Christian response was to be more loving. They whatever, right? So I will come back to this in a second. But they didn't uh they didn't fight people in the streets. They weren't focused on overthrowing the emperor. They didn't
Right.
militarize themselves. They didn't become fearful and insecure of their beliefs being taken away. Their beliefs were already pretty much being taken away, right?
Right.
So what happened? What happened in the context of Rome? Well, here was what happened throughout these persecutions for Christians. So the first thing, one of the biggest things, was often people that were, in that time in history, if you had an undesired child, if you had a child you didn't want, like again, they didn't have a social safety net. Okay, so they didn't have welfare, they didn't have government assistance for food. So if a person couldn't feed their children, or if they had an undesired child, they would just abandon them, right? They would leave them in areas outside of cities, and they would just let the kids die, right? What Christians would do is they would find these kids, and they would rescue them, and they would adopt them. So this it's so funny, because if you read these histories, like these Romans didn't believe that, well, they thought that the Christians, it wouldn't enter their mind that the Christians actually wanted to take care of these kids. So they thought that Christians were cannibals,
I know. I remember you saying that to me. That's
right?
crazy.
Because the thing that made sense to them was, well, they can't afford to feed the kids, but they'll eat the kids.
Dude,
That
imagine if
that's
that's your thought process. Like that's even
that
an
well, that
option for
shows you
food.
how savage things were back then, right?
Yeah.
Is like the human rights and the sanctity of a human life, that really comes from Christianity. I mean, that didn't exist at this time in the Roman Empire. So they thought Christians were cannibals because they were taking all these kids. Well, they were raising them, but they were like, no way is a person going to raise this kid,
Yeah.
right?
What's up with
So
that?
then what they did throughout all these different persecutions, hundreds of years, they fed and cared for people who were in need, like poor people were in need. Christianity became the social safety net of the Roman Empire. So it was normal at that time in history to die of starvation. Well, Christians did their best in the cities that they lived in to make sure that people didn't die of starvation, right? Then one particular big thing, there was a plague called the Plague of Cyprian, and at its height, it killed up to 5,000 people per day. Right? It's just this crazy.
Yeah.
So most Romans, when they discovered that their family members had the plague, they would just send them out into the streets to hopefully prevent themselves from getting sick, right? Adults and kids alike. So Christians were the only people who took people in during this time in history and cared for them. So they cared for these sick people at the risk of their own life, right? So how does the story end here as it relates to this? The Roman nobility starts to notice all the great things that Christians are doing. And they're like, man, like these guys, we probably shouldn't persecute these guys. We should probably adopt some of their practices. Right. And this is like the subtext of what leads to Constantine's conversion. And it's a whole long story that it's not topical for what we're going to talk about today. But Constantine makes Christianity the state religion of Rome. What Constantine ends up doing is he establishes bishops. He takes the leaders of the churches all throughout the Roman Empire, and he makes them responsible for the social safety net. So he starts to give money from the Roman Empire to the church so they can help take care of the people that live there, right? On and on I could go down this whole road. So the reason why these really great things happened and Christianity became this and the Catholic Church became all that started with not fighting for their rights, not rejecting authority, not rebelling against what was happening, even though what was happening was evil. And I think that's like this huge challenge, okay,
Yeah.
to learn about from this perspective, that their response, the Christian response at that time, was not to fight it and not to rant and rave against it, because you know what? Their voice didn't really matter. Like if
Yeah.
someone, and you can read this, like you talked about the sack of Jerusalem, there were all these different Jewish revolts, right? And the Roman army put them down so much, they didn't. So before it was called Palestine, so this is what made what changed the name of Israel to Palestine. So it was called Judea, right? And it's like the land of the Jews. Well, the Romans came down so hard on the Jews because of all their different Jewish revolts. They changed the name of Israel from Judea to Palestine. That was so they did their best. These guys revolted, and they did their best to just erase them from history. Now the Jews made it through, and so did Christians and all that. But the Romans had, if you rebelled against the Romans, if you rebelled against the empire, they were just going to kill you anyway. And so Christians didn't even have the option of that, right? But what Christians had was the perspective that the Bible has on spiritual authority, right? And so for most of human history, the reason why I spend all that time on that history is for most of human history, you didn't get to pick your leader. You just had to deal with whatever your leader was.
Right.
Right.
So yeah. Okay. Keep. So yeah. So the obvious transition goes. How does, because like ultimately who establishes authority is the kind of the underlying thought process, because there was only two times in scripture when Jesus was amazed. One was at the lack of faith in his own town, and the other one was the Roman centurion whenever he said, hey, you don't have to come to my house, just say the word. I too am a man of authority.
Yeah.
So like to amaze Jesus, and one of the things he was amazed at was there's two things, right? A lack of honor, or a lack of faith, I should say, and then an understanding of authority. So that like clearly God operates in authority, and it's revelatory to me that I've always wondered, like when you think about authority and the work that God's given you to do and what he's given you dominion over, I think it's very interesting when in Genesis 3, whenever he hands down the punishments, it's like, okay, you guys screwed up, there's going to be punishment. It's very specific to each person. There's the snake, there's the woman, and the man. And you think, okay, how are you going to punish them? You're going to punish them with what you've given them dominion over. So what's the woman's punishment? She's going to have like pain in childbearing, and her desire is going to be for her husband. He's going to rule over her. Oh man, you're supposed to be the helper. We're going to make that hard. You're supposed to reproduce. We're going to make that hard. Hey man, you had dominion over the ground. You were supposed to work it and keep it like I gave you. That was the mandate that you had, aka the authority that you were given. Well, now that's going to become hard. And I think that like God operates in authority in a way that we don't really. I can't say I fully grasp it, but I know that it's you, if you're not in line with his authority, you're just off having a nice walk. And even if you see cool things happening or you think you're doing it, it's like you need to understand that God works through authority.
Yeah, and what's so challenging, right? That's really hard to reconcile. Like, and this is like a deep cut of Christianity, right? Is if you read the book of Romans, if you read Romans 9, where so God establishes all authority. So then the question becomes, what do we do with evil authority?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
God in Romans 9, God says he put Pharaoh in place over Egypt to display his power.
Right.
Which is like, oh, okay, that's awesome, except for the fact that like a lot of people died at Pharaoh's hand.
Yeah.
And it was
So that
massive.
were slaves for 400 years. Hey,
yeah,
God,
it was
like what? Yeah.
Yeah, God did that. And God's saying he did that. And then he basically says, who are you to question that?
Right.
Right. Who are you to question who I put in authority? He says, I'm the potter, you're the clay.
Yeah.
So in America, we've developed this, and even like you hear Christian like thinkers in America talk about this. They're like, well, the government's not the authority, we're the authority. Like we the people, right?
Right.
Which is in a lot of ways true. I agree with the statement. I don't agree with the line of thinking. And what I mean by that is that you and I have no guarantee of godly authority.
Correct.
Right? Of having people in place in authority who are godly. And we also potentially, and I don't have like a right answer on this. This is just a conversation that I think is worth having. We also probably don't get to decide whether or not godly authorities in place.
What do you mean by that? Because surely we
Like,
have part in America, we have part in the democratic process. I mean, in our local elections, we're trying to, influence that right now, right? So I
yeah.
mean, there is something that we can do.
Well, you've been given. I mean, that's the cool thing is we've been given like a level of a part to play on some
Yeah,
level, right? Um, but then if you extend that line of thinking, so here's what people do, right? They extend that line of thinking into the church and into a lot of different places where that's not really how it works. And that's where I'm saying like the Western delusion for me. The Western delusion is thinking that every leadership environment works like a democracy.
right. Okay. Yeah,
So,
that makes sense.
so it's wonderful, man. The American experiment, representative government. I am not ever against that. It's amazing. Not everything works that way though.
You're right.
But even the idea, even that idea can make us think that we have more power than we actually have. Like
Right.
like if the we live in a country where the majority of people who vote probably shouldn't vote. Like
Yeah, that'll
they're
get you in
not
trouble.
well, no, I think everyone would agree to, and depending on their position, like they're not people, the average voter is not educated enough on the issues to accurately vote,
Well, that's probably
right?
easy to defend. Yeah.
They're going to vote a straight ticket. Like a liberal is going to vote liberal, a conservative is going to vote conservative, and it's going to be very rare for one of them to be that educated on the issues, right? Because to me, one of the signs that you're actually educated on the issues is you don't vote a straight ticket, right? The founding fathers in America talked about how the two-party system would really be the death of America,
Hmm.
right? And that's pretty much what we've developed. Why? Because people don't want to be educated on the issues, so they just go, well, like which part of this do I agree with? And that's not really the conversation for today. But we've developed something that's about, again, making it easy for people. So instead of a person having to be educated on the issues before they vote, they can just go vote based on whatever information they take in that may or may not even be true,
Right.
right?
But in the church, we don't have a vote, but people kind of they want to
Well,
have a vote. I
there's basically in the New Testament, there's three different biblical leadership structures for a church. Okay.
Okay.
A lot of people think there's only one, but there's three. So there's what's called a congregational led church, which is the congregation of the church votes on everything and they see everything and they vote on everything, who the pastor is, all that. Then there's an elder led church. So elder led church is all throughout scripture. But then there's also what's called an Episcopal church. An Episcopal church is a church that's led by the pastor,
Mhm.
right? And it's not a vote. It's not a vote scenario. Like the Catholic Church doesn't operate with votes and elders and all that.
Mhm.
So if you talk to like the average Christian, they think that the best run church, or not the best run, but the most biblical church is an elder run church or a congregational church. When really there's like these three models that you can pick from that neither one of them are more biblical or less biblical than another. And they all come with significant benefits and significant drawbacks,
Right.
right?
So real quick for those that are wondering. So like the elder-led church, obviously that's talked about quite a bit in Timothy, I believe, right? Which was to Ephesus when he's talking to him about what an elder should be. I think it's also in Titus that he talks about what leaders should be. I think there's two places. Where do you see the congregational led and the Episcopal? Like, do you know where those are at?
Let me
Give you a little time to look it up because
I could
because
pull
I
it up. I could pull it up, but I think it's not the most I don't know if it's the most relevant to what we're talking about. But
okay, yeah,
I'll say this. So to come back to talking about the authority thing,
yeah,
how does God set up the first and primary authority structure that we have in our life? He just gives them to us.
right. Parents.
Like
Yeah.
again, to go back to parents, that's the first primary leadership structure that we get in our life is the one we don't choose.
Right.
Okay. So that's like the first one. Then let's go to the Old Testament. So the Old Testament, you have the relationship between Saul and David. Okay. And this is where I want to give a perspective that's probably different than what a lot of people kind of think on authority.
Okay.
Okay. So Saul and David, there's a great book, another book I would recommend for anybody to read. We talked about Watchman Nee's Spiritual Authority and Undercover by John Bevere last time. But there's an amazing book. It's written in story form. It's called A Tale of Three Kings. And it talks about Saul and David and Absalom, and really how David responded to Saul and Absalom, which is just really fascinating. But so God establishes Saul as the king of Israel, right? The Israelites asked for a king. God establishes him as king. He's a bad king. God anoints David as the next king. So everyone knows David's going to become the next guy, right? Including David and Saul. And what does David do? He does everything he can to not do it himself. Right. He doesn't rebel against Saul. He doesn't take half the kingdom away. He doesn't say Saul's a bad guy and I'm a good guy. God said I'm a man after his own heart and Saul's not anymore. The whole time he calls Saul God's anointed.
Yeah.
There's even a part in the story in 2 Samuel 1. So there's a story of Saul. Saul goes to the battlefield. Him and his sons are all killed by the Amalekites, right? Everyone knows David's like anointed as king, right? He's the next guy. Saul dies this kind of gruesome death, right? He falls on his sword, but he doesn't die. So there's this Amalekite who shows up, and Saul pleads to this Amalekite for the Amalekite to kill him. He says, "Please kill me." So the Amalekite kills him. Well, the Amalekite goes to David and says, "Hey, I killed Saul," thinking that David is going to reward that behavior. Because what, why wouldn't he? He's God's man, and Saul's not God's man anymore. David kills that guy,
right,
for touching the Lord's anointed.
Yeah.
So I'm going kind of like deeper on that, but there's this interesting dynamic with leadership and with authority that if you really believe that God establishes authority, okay, and God's the one that puts authority in place. So what comes with believing that God puts authority in place in life is believing that God also removes the authority. Right. So what a lot of people don't realize is if you actually buy into establishes authority, then you have to also buy into the idea that God removes the authority, that it's not your responsibility to hold them accountable. Now we should unpack that, but like that's really challenging. So to go back to let's make it more practical, to go back to like the idea of the church. Okay. So what a lot of people want to talk about in the church is we should hold the pastor accountable. Right. How do you as a child, and this could be a challenging like metaphor for people, but how does a child hold their parents accountable?
Yeah, I mean it's a great question. Unless you're with the legalities of some kids have divorced their parents, but that's obviously not like the norm. That's a very extreme.
Yeah, they could. I mean, I guess your kids like Elijah or Hope or Evie, like they could call CPS on you. I mean,
yeah, there's protective services, but they'd have to prove something.
There's certain things, but it's really hard.
Yeah.
Right. So to use your family as an example, use my family as an example. I have a responsibility. Like there's actually not a lot of people in my life, unless I choose them. There's not a lot of people in my life who can hold me accountable right now with how young my kids are for how I'm parenting them.
Right.
And that can be scary. And it is scary when you have evil people that become parents. Right. But it still doesn't change the accountability dynamic. So for me, and some of this is my own thinking and opinion and interpretation, how I've lived and what I've experienced and what I've read in the Bible. I have to ask myself this question: how much does God make me responsible for holding leadership that he puts in place accountable? Thank you for listening to the Dialogue. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And also, if you think someone else would enjoy this, please send it to them. If you want to get in touch or learn more about me, what I think, speak, and write, you can go to joshuacraft.com, or you can also follow Nick and I on Instagram. Our handles are in the show notes. We'll see you next time.